people from a number of different companies have been paid by the company to go in and memorize 2 or 3 or 4 questions and all the responses to them, bring them out and use them as seed questions to prep their peers. And then finally they'll go back in and they'll pass. Sure. But all the exam questions are highly compromised. We would never accept this from a civil servant's engineering exam, a medical exam,
electrical engineer.
Exactly. But for some reason, we accept this for software. And it has a debilitating effect on the value of those individuals who hold the exam. Yeah. One, you should immediately consider anyone who holds it suspect.
Yeah.
Because the exam itself has been compromised. Right. And there are a lot of people who use that as a checkoff box. It's like, oh, you have this credential. Oh, you're qualified. Mm-hmm. And they get passed all the way through the system. And in many cases, they've never even touched the tool.
Yeah. I think it's also the idea that there's a lot of people in hiring in managerial positions that do not have a testing background, but suddenly they have testing thrust upon them. And the defense is, I just don't know better. I mean, I was in a meeting recently, was like, okay, I'm doing this huge project, but when it comes to performance, I don't even know. They just excuse themselves from saying something more productive, like help me understand what kind of testing for performance is appropriate based on your knowledge. And two things that I think are going to come out of this. One is that ISTQB and versus context-driven and other forms of testing or ways of testing or systems of testing are going to have to draw the line. And I think the ISTQB has done a nice job of taking advantage of the ignorance of most hiring managers and just saying, here's a 4-letter acronym that says you should hire me. And not that the ISTQB or ASTQB and all of these things don't have good goals, but they also steal a bunch of information. Like you're talking about these guys. It's just, hey, we're just going to plagiarize stuff. We're going to take these ideas from the scholars in the industry and we're going to put them into an exam. And we're going to just try to represent that. And the thing with the CISSP you bring out is that they got some of the top people in security to be the ongoing long-term. I mean, we're talking 10 to 15 years worth of dedicated respect to these industry veterans in security that stuck with it. And what gives a certification its legs is the people that put their name behind it and continue to support it and refine it and control it and improve it. And I think that's what we're trying to do on PerfBytes in combination, although we haven't had a lot of activity on the Performance Book of Knowledge. The Book of Knowledge is where it all starts, and the clout, the importance or the creditation, or credibility of that certification comes from the fact that guys like you and I are willing to stick with it and say, you know what, I'm not going to let this just become a commercial piece of crap. So I think that's the real argument, is that the ISO, because it has a name, it has clout, people are going to assume that that definition of software testing, or performance testing for that matter, which I hate to see. I'm going to go read it. I don't think there's probably anything mentioning performance. It's a functional testing spec. That's not going to help healthcare.gov 0.2.0.
No, yeah. I don't think so either. And in fact, if we strip back the layers of CISSP and where it came from, that organization spent a decade or more before there was ever an ANSI or ISO number associated with their qualities. And they began with these core foundation skills and certifications in core foundation skills. If we were to look at performance as a discipline and say, okay, if we follow the path of CISSP, the first place we would begin as we're building a common body of knowledge is with some sort of composite certification. Right. That is, you get a certification in Oracle and SQL Server. You get a certification in an operating system, be it Windows, Unix, Linux. You get a couple certifications in languages, one functional, one object-oriented, and maybe some web credential as well. Right. And then say, okay, you get 6 out of 12 of these, and you sit with peer for a while, and we ask you a bunch of questions. And if the 2 out of the 3 peers say, yeah, your thumbs up, then you get a credential. And that's usually the starting point to move towards a more formal process of, we build our own book of knowledge, and then we'll finally test you, and you can kind of orphan these foundation credentials over here.
And for performance, we're just not there yet. And I think you do. We have the right people. We know the list. Some of our greatest followers and contributors to PerfBytes on the VIP list. I'm sure their heart and their professionalism is in the right place to help us get there. We'll see where that goes. Particularly on the cast, there's a special interest group inside AST, but there's also a website that Karen and Eric Pregler started, the www.professionaltestermanifesto.org is basically stating some very interesting values about being a software tester, whether you're certified or not, and goes beyond that definition. So check out professionaltestermanifesto.org. And James, we need to take a short break from our continuing sponsor support from Nuco. You remember Nuco, right? You like those guys?
Hosting for PerfBytes.com has been provided by Nuco, New Centers of Excellence in Performance Engineering, PowerTest Professional Services, The Script Farm, LoadRunner by the Hour, Videratech, Cloud Architect, and No Load Test. For more information, go to www.newcoe.com or call 703-856-8187.
Okay, so thank you. And let's switch gears a little bit because it's September 1st. We're recording this on Labor Day, so it is a holiday, which is wonderful. And hopefully you've spent time outside in the yard like I did today. But I didn't have beer. I should have had beer because like Labor Day, yard work, beer, that seems like very poetic to me.
Yeah, kind of a light ale to go along with mowing the yard.
Pabst Blue Ribbon, it comes to mind as a great American ale.
Yeah,
it's good. Goes with lawn mowing. I would, and it's mostly water, so it keeps you hydrated.
Exactly.
Yeah, very good. All right. So, given that the fact that it's a holiday today, September 1st, it's really the main holiday that is the line in the sand for those of you that are getting ready for holiday performance come this November, and more affectionately known as Black Friday, and of course for those of us in the e-commerce world, Cyber Monday. Yeah. And James, we've covered this in former episodes. We've talked about how to survive point load. We've talked about it in the first few episodes, Holiday Readiness 2013. So maybe we revisit this a little bit to talk to customers or listeners out there who are actually kind of veterans. Maybe they've done holiday load testing, but let's review some of our top things and go a little bit deeper in terms of where somebody who thinks they've got it together for holiday testing, but what are the 3 or 4 things that maybe they're not thinking of?
Yeah, and Mark, I'd like to kind of address some business process items as well. We talk a lot about technology and what we can do inside the app. I think there's some things that we can do from a business process perspective that'll help your performance on Black Friday and Cyber Monday. Just is overall general improvement. Okay. So with that in mind, let's talk about the big one where we're at right now. Let's talk about a moratorium on releases.
Some people don't do this, and the customer I'm working with right now, they're religiously committed to having a moratorium starting about mid-October or end of October.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a great idea, but maybe there's business people who don't understand that from a release and change, particularly with continuous release, continuous deployment. Some people might not get the idea that if you're going to change things at the last minute before Black Friday, is there enough time to really know that that's going to perform?
Yeah. There's a risk piece that comes into play here. If you're in a continuous integration and development and deployment environment, SOSA is a great friend of the show, and I think they build 8 releases a day. I don't think they release 8 releases a day, but they build 8 releases a day.
Right.
During your holiday period, do you really want to deploy 8 releases a day? I think at some point, from a risk standpoint, you want to cut your release schedule and say, this is our final release before the holidays.
Yeah.
And if we do anything, all we're going to do is tune the OS. We're going to tune our content delivery network. We're going to tune these other things, but we're not going to touch the code because the risk is just too high.
If we look at it from a business perspective, think of it this way. You're not going to change the scope of the campaign or the feature set that's being launched for the holiday event. That you're doing your business projections on certain features, certain products that are being launched, certain campaigns. And once those are locked down, pretty much that's what we're doing for this holiday. Even the marketing department and the product owners are kind of saying, you know what, these are kind of the core things. And so put a line in the sand. The first one is on when the scope of the program or the scope of those features and campaigns comes to an end. It's probably going to be in the next month. So I'm saying by October, it'll probably give you a month worth of technical work to actually implement everything you need to get those things done. Hopefully you've done it before then, but right now you're in the last minute stuff. So the first gate you have is that the business starts to think about these are the things we're committing to for the campaign. Now, you might get totally surprised. You know, Apple comes along and launches a new iPhone or something, and suddenly you're like, whoa, we need to get in on this thing. And, you know, that's bad business strategy. And sometimes you have to move fast, and modern platforms let you do that. Maybe it's just a product ad or some small things. But a moratorium on major architectural change and major scope of the program changes is a good idea. And the next gate, James, I think would be, like you say, those would be app code changes that are required to support the features. And those major things should be through, I don't know, it's probably good to target early October and get them tested by mid-October before you hit November, right?
Absolutely. And you should absolutely lock down the system, you know, a week to 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. You don't want any surprises in the system. You want totally burned in code, so to speak, that's been running 24/7 very happily for you.
Yeah.
But Mark, you know, occasionally the yoo-hoo just is going to flow through the system. And
by the way, yoo-hoo is a metaphor.
Yoo-hoo is a metaphor in this case.
It's also glue stick, right? The yoo-hoo stick was a gluey.
Yeah, it's not the actual trademark name of a beverage in this case.
Yes, that's right.
So you need to plan for that. And that kind of brings us to item number 2, which is the SWAT team list.
Well, hang on. Before we go to the SWAT team, I think there's a third gate, as you pointed out earlier, that once the app code is locked down and, like you say, burned in and really kind of proven, there's still some people put a moratorium and, you know, the code is config is code. But you know what? A lot of people say you're done testing for performance. I'm like, look, I'm going to be testing runs, what if scenarios, bizarre scenarios, extreme scenarios, spike tests. I'm going to, even though the code may be locked down, I would still like to run almost past the moratorium number. Like, let's say it's November 1st, you're going to lock it down and no more changes at all. I want to keep doing performance testing because if I find something as simple as, you know what, the projections for the spike that are coming on Cyber Monday are maybe 1.5 what we thought it was going to be. And I just ran a 2x test. And somewhere between 1.5 and 2x, I just need another 30 connections in a connection pool. And that's such a simple setting. Yeah. If your old IT department is like, no, thou shalt not change anything, bam. You know, in a modern world, making a small change like that, as long as you back it up with really good test results, you still have time between, say, November 1st and November and Black Friday to get small config changes, tuning config change. You know what? We need just a little more memory in the heap on this particular app. Don't be afraid. Don't shut down. Keep testing and keep telling your bosses, like, sometimes we just find major performance bugs that are solved by very small little tweaks to the config.
Now, Mark, I don't disagree with that at all. I consider that as part of disaster planning. Not only do you need to have those tricks in the bag where you can deploy it for general usability, just making system config changes but no code changes, but you need to have that for the what if when things go wrong. You absolutely need to have that, and you need to have those items that you've identified that ops can keep an eye on, that if you start running out of resource in these areas, make these changes and deploy them on a rolling basis to the servers so we don't run out of headroom and we don't have.
And if you don't run a stress test, you're never going to know those things. You're not going to know your top resource exhaustion. So another thing that a mature customer is going to get into with this thing is we're always going to establish a SWAT team. Now, James, you and I have been on the SWAT team before, but there was no